What do you think, we were just talking about, you saying lots of good work is coming out now, but what do you see as the kind of trajectory for the field in general?
We need Malaysians and maybe Singaporeans to be working on, if we're talking about Aslian, on these languages. The NTU Linguistics Department fortunately has a strong commitment to real field working in linguistics, so I hope there's some encouragement from there. As I mentioned earlier, I've been persistently, when I meet with Malaysians who might be in a position to do this, I've been trying to get them to do this. There's at least one Orang Asli woman herself who's doing a PhD in anthropology. I think I've persuaded her about the advantages of doing phonemic transcription of her language. But I did this by taking a book that another anthropologist had written on the same people and reading out passages.
Oh, really?
And she understood it, and she was amazed that I could do this without even knowing the language, simply because the phonemic transcription was so good. She has since visited the Aslianists at Lund, and I'm hoping that although she's doing an anthropology degree, she will at least get her transcriptions right. I hope there might be others. Unfortunately, there is a sense in Malaysia that to have a proper academic career in linguistics, you've got to work on Malay. That's very bad, because much of the work on Malay, in fact, is itself actively standardizing the language as it goes along. Although there are other linguists, particularly those who were trained by Jim Collins, who have been doing fieldwork on real local dialects. So the situation's a bit mixed there, but Aslian is still not yet being taken up within Malaysia to the extent that it should be. The situation in Thailand is different. The Thai linguist, there's a small number of Aslian languages, northern Aslian languages spoken in the south of Thailand, and Thai linguists take Mon Khmer languages very seriously, and they do very good work on it. It's a pity that it hasn't influenced what goes on in Malaysia very much.
How many languages do you think there are that haven't been described at all?
There's a problem about boundary between language and dialect in Aslian, but there are 4 major divisions. Exactly how many there are within each division is a bit of a problem, but even with languages that have had initial descriptions, there's still plenty of room for more work. There's only one solid dictionary of any Aslian language. That's Nicole Krusper's one, not of Somalai, the one she wrote on the grammar on, but of another language called Mahmari. So there's plenty of room for dictionary work, and I've been rather slow on that myself. But of course, if they're not going to transcribe the languages properly, to produce a dictionary of any worth is going to be a bit of a problem. There are dictionaries which are badly transcribed. They're more, they could cause more trouble than the worth of it actually in the long run. But there's plenty of scope for good descriptive work, good sociolinguistics, and so on. Another problem that fascinated me, but I have no solid data on it, is how do Orang Asli learn to speak Malay, especially in the days before they had gone to school to learn it as the standard language. I don't know how this was done, but by the time I got to the field, all Tamias, indeed all Orang Asli I ever met, could speak some Malay, and some could speak it extremely well, including switching between Kelantan dialect of Malay and the standard language. Whereas 50 to 100 years ago, there were reports that most of them could not speak Malay. And the Orang Asli, 99% of them were non-literate when I first went to the field. That's not true anymore. They are now literate, at least in Malay. I don't know how they managed to pick up Malay with relatively restricted contact with Malays. So that's something that maybe, possibly it's too late to research now, but would have been a fascinating study.
You said in one of your, I think an earlier interview, you said that there are some Orang Asli who themselves have become field workers and linguists and other researchers.
Not full-time linguists, but ethnographers, yes.
Ethnographers.
Yeah, there have been. The first of these was probably Julie Edo, who was a Samai, who did his PhD at ANU in Canberra, supervised by Jim Fox, among others. He's at the University of Malaya. In fact, became Dean of Arts there. Never became Malay, he remains Semai. His own transcriptions are a bit shaky, but his ethnographic and historical work is very good. There's this Samalai woman I mentioned who is, I hope, will come out with a PhD very soon, and her work is very solid, what I've seen of it. There have been some others who've done work at master's level. How many others are doing these kinds of subjects at the moment, I'm not quite sure.
Is there anything else you'd like to talk about from your past that you think would be interesting for a general audience? Or for your present, or your future?
My future, well, I'm going on 78 soon, but still active, but rarely in a full-time capacity. So the income is not always as I'd like, but I certainly intend to keep going with at least my own work. I enjoy teaching, so insofar as I get the opportunity to teach students, and the NTU students by and large are very good and good to teach, because they are selected from the beginning as being suitable for a four-year honours program, so it shows, I think, when they eventually end up in the fourth year. So I'd like to continue teaching. I'd like to continue my own research. As regards field work, in recent years I've been doing rather more shallow work from a scholarly point of view, but it's in the Riau Islands near here in Indonesia, and I'm involved there for various other reasons. The only things I've published or about to publish there is on the music of that area, including modern composers in Tanjung Pinang City. So with that very strong musical background, I've turned recently to maybe publishing on it. I have taught a course on Southeast Asian music at various times, both at NUS and at NTU, so I am interested in it. But, so that's an area I might develop. But whether it's physically safe enough for me to go back to Temea field, I haven't been there since 2010. I'm not sure. I really need to do some more work. I need to do work on the lexicon. I've got lots of words in my notebook and I have no idea what they mean. Just written down from overheard conversation and so on. If I can arrange to get some good respondents down here, that might solve it. But I also need to work on land rights, which is a very contentious issue right now in the areas I used to work in, with cases going to the courts and blockades by the Temeas of timber people coming in. I'm contracted to do a book on Temea society, and most of it is written, but that final chapter needs to be about the current land rights issue, and I simply don't understand it well enough without actually going back to the field. So these are some things I would like to be doing.
The work you said in the Riau Islands, what is that about?
My wife Vivian Wee did her PhD on the Malays of that area, with a sort of central focus on the small island Pulau Penyengat, which is basically the source of the standardized Malay, Malaysian and Indonesian languages, because it was a center of literary production back in the 19th century, had printing presses and so on there. And that is, it's acknowledged when people talk about Johor Riau Malay, they are actually referring historically to the language still spoken on that island, but it's just a 15-20 minute small boat ride from the rather large city of Tanjung Pinang, which has people from all over Indonesia there, where all kinds of other languages and other varieties of Malay, including this strange stripped down version that David Gill has written on. He did his research in Tanjung Pinang. It's not Malay as I know it, it's something else. But what we are doing there, Vivian is continuing her work and is producing a book coming out of her thesis, which is now decades old, but brought up to date on what it means to be Malay in that area, where being Malay is very layered. It's all the way from tribal Orang Laut, nomadic Orang Laut, to the other originally peasant people, and the royals, who are largely of Bugis descent, who are people we know very well. So that's there's this scholarly side of things, but we're also involved in developing with the local people and in association with a Singapore company that runs the ferry terminals here, proper package tours there which concentrate on the heritage of that area and to be run by the local people. Not just Malay heritage, because there's actually a very old Chinese community there too, the Teochew-speaking community, which is older than the one in Singapore, and in fact from which the earliest Chinese in Singapore came from. They're still very active there. So it's a very interesting area, largely on the southern part of Bintan Island. So we are doing that more as a that has a commercial side to it, but we're doing it really as a kind of applied anthropology. And we have this company called Ethnographica Private Limited. We're doing study for the National Heritage Board in Singapore as well on intangible cultural heritage. We did a big study on Pulau Ubin, an offshore island of Singapore, which the Singapore government for many years has not known what to do with. At one stage they wanted to extend the MRT metro there and build HDB flats, but they decided finally they're going to try and keep it as a kind of rural backwater, but with a population actually living there viably, and that's the part we've been researching. It hasn't all been made public yet, but we're hoping something will come out of it. But so these are the sorts of things that...
Was that related also to the small islands that eventually would disappear or were merged into...
that's happened already. We, as part of the Riau study, we also did work on Pulau Seking, which was the last of the inhabited southern islands of Singapore. The people have since been moved off, and that island itself has been flattened and joined up to a neighbouring island with literal garbage from the mainland of Singapore. It's sort of a nature reserve. So I have lots of photographs from that time, and we've got our ethnographic material. Two other people who were originally students at NUS also did work there. We're hoping to produce a book on this now disappeared island for the Singapore Heritage Society, but that's on a back burner at the moment. We've got to finish the other things first. So, yes, some interest in Singapore as well. Although I don't write very much on Singapore.
Is there anything else you'd like to talk about?
Not unless you can come up with a
one of the things
shocking or surprising question.
No, one of the things I should have asked earlier was about the kind of, how do you get training at ethnography? You know, like what?
As an undergraduate, there was a course taught by Audrey Richards, another of Malinowski's students who did great work in Central Africa, very important anthropologist. She did do a course on how to do ethnography.
Kind of like field methods course in linguistics?
Field methods course. But of course, since this was aimed at people who might eventually do work even outside Europe, but sitting there in a lecture theatre is a bit strange. We had some practical experience, however. She happened to live in a village called Elmdon to the south of Cambridge, which is very old, so old that it was mentioned in the Doomsday Book. And we did a study of it, which has since been published, written up by Marilyn Strathern, who was one of the same cohort I was in. And we actually stayed in Audrey Richards' house. Her house was in the old, was formerly the Tudor schoolhouse. And this is a village which had a very feudal structure with a lord of the manor and other people there. And we did, for some weeks, do some work there. And I went around with Edmund Leach as he was interviewing people. And it was very interesting to observe him at work. He never took the superficial answer as the right answer. And I learned quite a lot from that. I mentioned something of this in the information I supplied to Stanley Tambaya of the book he wrote on Leach, and I picked up something from that. But the rest I really had to learn as I went along, plunged straight into the field in Malaysia, taken in by helicopter, dumped there, not speaking very good Malay, with people who knew absolutely no English. So I just had to figure it out as I went along. It really is a sort of art. I assume it's similar to what doctors have to learn. You know, they learn the medical stuff, but the diagnostic practice is partly an art. They just have to pick up as they go along.
Yeah. One last thing then, I'd like to ask is about your music. Your music is a big part of your life.
Actually, in recent years, I've become very active again. I'm in fact playing in 2 concerts at the end of this week, and did so just a couple of weeks ago. I'm interested in all kinds of music, but I'm a woodwind player. I play flutes of all kinds, modern, baroque, and now I'm studying the Renaissance flute, which is much harder to play than the modern flute. And I play recorder quite seriously of all sizes and periods. So I'm currently in this early music group called Capella Martialis, which is run by a Singaporean who, believe it or not, is a classical scholar, teaches Latin and Greek, but is interested in Renaissance and early Baroque music. His name is Edward Young. And I'm in that group. I variously play recorders or flutes in it. And the basis of the group is a chorus with a co-opted instrumentalist when necessary. But I have played other kinds of music, and in the old days, back in the 70s, I ran something called the Singapore Telemann Ensemble. We weren't playing on early instruments then, we were playing on modern instruments. We played both old music and 20th century music. And we made programs for the then broadcasting, FM station, which they don't do anymore, and I've still got some of those recordings. Vivian actually has a music degree, and she's a fine pianist. Yeah, she's a keyboardist, the piano behind you. She's a bit busy these days and doesn't play as much as she should, but when she wants to, she can turn her hand to playing keyboard, piano, harpsichord, sure. And has given concerts, and actually she's played concertos.
And this is something you started when you were young, or?
Recorder quite early. Flute, actually after I came to Singapore, picked it up, and I played for many years in the NUS Orchestra, and for some years in what was then called the Lyric Theatre Orchestra, the one that accompanies the opera, and I played flute and piccolo in that. I actually used to play oboe as well in the NUS Orchestra. So I'm not in an orchestra proper now, only in this smaller group.
But did this in any way influence or affect your work in academics? Like, for example, I know a Japanese linguist named Sawada who plays recorder and very well, and he will use it very often. Like you said, you were out in the wilds and kind of feeling alone sometimes, and he would play and make himself feel good, and
I can't remember whether I took an instrument with me. I might have done, but I certainly paid attention to their music, which was since later studied in great detail by Marina Roseman, who's written a monograph and several papers on it. So I did make field recordings, and
it's also, for me, when you study music, the sense of structure and the sense of the way you think about things, I think is effective.
It should help one transcribe the language better. I recently had a look at some of my earliest language transcriptions, because both Nicholas Birenhoff from Lund and Hiram Ring from here are interested in archiving some of this stuff. And I had forgotten completely about this. I actually notated running intonational patterns around my phonetic transcriptions with lines running up and down the pitch. I'll have to use that someday, because I've never properly reported on the intonation patterns. So yeah, I was at least sensitive to that.
Right. Yeah, I could see how that would affect the way you think about certain things, at least. And just the culture. It's also, sometimes if you play an instrument yourself, a way of making friends, because sometimes when you do field work, it's nice to have some way of making friends.
That's helped to some extent, because I've been amongst what I've been what I've been doing in the Rio Islands is looking at quite sophisticated modern composers in Tanjung Pinang and Pulau Panjang who are writing in what you might call an advanced Malay style, and I understand more easily what they're about.
Yeah.
We can talk to them in musical
good.
terms. Yeah.
Mm.
So there's a paper in press on that. Yeah.
Mm. Okay, good. Well, thank you very much for talking with me
It's been
today.
a pleasure.
This has been very enjoyable. So we've been here again with Professor Geoffrey Benjamin, and we'll maybe follow this on later on with another video.